Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome and welcome back to the channel. I'm Elle, this is Zaz, and this is Elle's Reptiles. This week we are doing a video requested by one of you guys on Instagram, I think this was, all about caring for California kingsnakes. California kingsnakes, I am pretty... Where are you going? Up? I have not been keeping California kingsnakes for a very, very long time. I have had mine for about a year or two at this point, I think. Just a huge disclaimer, my care guide is based off of research, mostly from Reptiles, and my own experience, which has not been crazy. So if you are taking care of a California kingsnake, make sure this is not the only video you watch. Make sure you do your own research, and as always, care for your creature the best that you can and whatever works best for you and your kingsnake. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by iHeartGecko, so make sure to stay until the end of the video to find out all about this awesome company. Let's get started. First, let's just go into some basic information about these guys. The California kingsnake, like its name suggests, is from here in the United States, where I live, at least. You may not be watching this in the United States. It is a colubrid type snake that comes in many different localities. I learned that they are not morphs. They are localities, and that is the different black and white patterning on these guys. They can live for up to 20 years, so make sure if you are getting a California kingsnake, you know that this is a pretty large commitment. And California kingsnakes at adulthood can be usually they're about 3 to 5 feet long. Unlike some other popular pet snakes like ball pythons or corn snakes, these guys do musk, especially when they're babies and they are getting used to being handled. When you take them out of that tank, they may spray this really stinky liquid on you. It's just a defensive maneuver that they have to ward off predators, but it is something that king snakes do. King snakes are really cool. They get their name from the fact that in the wild, these guys can eat all the other snakes. They will eat rattlesnakes. They just eat all the other snakes. Keep that in mind. Don't put your king snake with other snakes. Don't put your king snakes with other king snakes. Don't put your king snakes with other things. Because these guys are native to the United States, it can be pretty easy to get wild caught king snakes. As always, I always suggest getting captive bred animals as opposed to wild caught. Wild caught animals come with a plethora of parasites and illnesses and issues. Always go captive bred if you can, and they are pretty readily available at reptile shows and just by local breeders, so they are pretty easy to find. Moving on to housing these guys. King snakes, again, get up to about 5 feet long. According to Reptiles, they need at least a 4 foot by 2 foot tank. If you can go bigger, it's always good to go bigger. My adult corn snake is in a 6 foot tank. My king snake, who is not fully grown, is currently in a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. It just doesn't feel like enough to me to be 5 foot long and only have a 4 foot tank. But bare minimum requirements is going to be 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. If you can give them climbing room, definitely do that. Actually, not if. Give them climbing room. Give them branches and sticks that they can get up on because they will use it. In addition to that climbing room, they will also burrow. So make sure that they have substrate that they can burrow into. If you're going bioactive, it may be best to keep the plants in pots because they will burrow into the roots of plants. I mean, they can also do this in pots too, because my king snake burrows down into the pots all the time. So, I mean, do what you will, but just know that generally they do like getting down into those plant roots. Make sure that there's a bunch of hides in there. My specific king snake is very shy. He doesn't like to be out when people are around. The more areas your king snake has to hide in that tank, the more you're going to see them, which sounds counterintuitive, but if they feel like that at a moment's notice they can run and hide and get away from a threat, they're more likely to come out and be seen because they feel safe enough to do that, if that makes sense. Same for enrichment. Make sure that that tank is filled with substrate and leaves, whether they're fake vines or real plants, and branches and maybe driftwoods, hides, whether they are made by you, like natural background hides, or maybe you go and buy hides. My king snake's favorite hide is this moss birdhouse from Home Depot. He absolutely loves that thing, and I love that he loves it because when he's shedding, I can just spray it down and that's where he'll be. But you can provide a humid hide if your snake needs it. Just make sure that that tank is full and your snake has things to do in that tank. Don't just give them an empty box of nothing, please. As far as that substrate, honestly, pretty much anything is going to be okay. Repti soil, eco earth plantation soil. You can do a mixture of like organic topsoils and a little bit of clay sand. That's what I like to do. And I think mix some moss into mine as well. Any sort of loose substrate that's going to hold like just the tiniest amount of humidity is going to work. I wouldn't necessarily suggest aspen just because they do like to burrow and stay underground, and aspen doesn't really hold shape. I wouldn't personally suggest aspen, but any sort of soil substrate is going to be fantastic. And of course, as with all snakes, make sure they have a source of water. Make sure the water dish is big enough that they can go into and soak if they are about to shed. They can just curl up in there, but just make sure that they have some source of water. Important for all reptiles, super important for everything, for all the things. Make sure that they have access to fresh, clean water. Many people will use dechlorinated, like the big bottles of water. For me specifically, I like to use ReptiSafe because it removes the chlorine and it adds calcium to the water. Not sponsored, I've just been using it for the last 7-8 years, I don't know. But it works and it lasts, a little bottle lasts for such a long time because you just put a couple drops in. You don't have to use the ReptiSafe brand. I think Lugardi makes some. There's a few different brands that make it. Either way, make sure that your critter has water. On to heating, lighting, and humidity. King snakes do not need crazy high temperatures. Their basking surface only needs to be about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the cool side of their tank, room temperature, is fine. Anything between like 70 and 78 is going to be good to go for them. So you don't need anything crazy in heating their environment, but you can accomplish this by using basking bulbs, heat bulbs, like small ones, because again, that temperature is only 90. It's not going to take a lot to get there. You can use heat pads on thermostats. Always use a thermostat with a heat pad. You can use things like deep heat projectors on a dimmer switch, because again, pretty low temperatures. Anything really to get that side up. I have used both heat pads and basking bulbs, and both are fantastic. Even my very shy king snake will come out and bask on his little basking surface if no one is in this room. As far as UVB, king snakes are known in the wild to come out both in the daytime and at night. So I do like to give my king snake UVB. He has a ReptiSun 5.0, the LED UVB light that spans the whole thing, and he will come out and lay under it. I like to give any reptile that I can UVB because I feel like it makes a huge difference in their activity levels, and it just makes me feel better knowing that they are getting that vitamin D naturally and they're not just relying on the things that they eat. That being said, king snakes can be kept without UVB light. And as far as humidity, they don't require anything crazy. Like I said before, you can have a humid hide in there for when they're shedding, but basically normal household humidity is going to be fine for these guys. They like it in the 40 to 60 range. I think houses are usually in the low 40s, maybe. I mean, you can always spray their tank down when they're about to shed. That'll be fine. Why are you just dangling your leg? Okay, here, let's get you up here. There you go. Now you have grip. All right, on to feeding these guys. For king snakes, generally, they're going to be pretty good eaters. Obviously, not every king snake is the same. Some are not going to eat well, but for the most part, they are colubrids, and colubrids are generally pretty good eaters. Before we get into what to feed them, let's just quickly talk about what happens if they aren't eating. Number one, make sure to check those temperatures. If they cannot get warm enough to digest their food, they're not gonna eat. Number two, make sure that the tank is full enough. My king snake will not eat out in the open. He is very shy, like I said. He needs cover, so make sure your tank is full enough. Try putting their food somewhere hidden, like maybe in their hide or somewhere that you know they like to go that's away from everything. King snakes aren't normally finicky eaters, but there always are going to be some that are. So if that's the case, this is an example video I filmed a while ago. I'm not even sure what animal this was for, but for king snake, you can put them into a container, put their frozen thawed rodent in there. Don't just put a frozen one like in this example, and you're going to cover that container. For a king snake, plastic wrap probably isn't going to be great. Just use the lid that came with the container. Make sure there's air holes drilled in there. Make sure they can't escape. But basically, this method forces them to run into that rodent over and over and over again, and usually eventually they'll eat. Also, having this in a dark, quiet room usually helps as well. And of course, make sure that you are feeding appropriately sized rodents or whatever it is that you're feeding. Make sure it's the right size. If it's too big, they're probably not going to eat it. Okay, so now on to what to feed them. They are snakes, they are going to eat rodents for the most part. As babies, you're gonna feed them about once a week, and then as they become adults, that's gonna change to about once every 2 weeks, once every 10 days, week and a half, 2 weeks, somewhere around in there. For the most part, they're gonna eat mice, and you want to make sure that whatever rodent you are feeding them is no bigger than about 1.5 times the side of the widest point of their body. So, I mean, king snakes are colubrids. They are pretty skinny, and so you don't want to feed them anything crazy. You're gonna feed them like just little small mice. You also have the option, not sponsored, of doing things like Reptilinks. I mention this because my king snake absolutely loves the frog Reptilinks, and it's just a cool way to add variety to that diet so that they're not just eating rats all the time, because in the wild, obviously they eat more than just rats. My king snake loves the frog ones, and he loves the quail. I think it's quail. Just another option to throw out there. I think it's either Petco or PetSmart. I think it's Petco. Actually sells these in the freezer departments at some Petcos, I guess, not all of them. I don't really know. Another way that you can measure that size is just about 10% of their body weight. If you just want to use a kitchen scale, you can do it that way as well. Just the 1 to 1.5 times the biggest part of the body is just usually the easiest way to do it. Just kind of eyeball it and don't give them anything crazy big. On to shedding. We already kind of talked about humidity. So they are a snake, they are going to shed. For the most part, it's usually going to be one big piece, and that is good. That means that your humidity is high enough for them to shed appropriately. If they are shedding and it's coming off in a bunch of little pieces, again, I suggest either spraying that tank down when you notice that they're shedding, or putting some sort of humid hide in that tank for them, or even just a humid spot, maybe in their warm hide, throw some moss, some wet moss in there, and that could help. Also, if you notice that your king snake is shedding, just keep in mind, probably don't mess with them. Snakes generally aren't the happiest when they are shedding. Some are. This is not a one size fits all. Nothing is a one size fits all. They're generally not the happiest when they're shedding because they can't see. They also shed the cap over their eyes, and so when a snake or anything sheds, it kind of releases, and when that happens over their eyes, they can't see. That's why their eyes kind of go blue. So they're going to get really grumpy because they don't know what's happening around them. So try not to handle them. They probably won't eat when they are shedding. Some, just keep that in mind. If your king snake stops eating for a couple of weeks, they might be shedding. So just look at that. Cleaning that tank. So obviously you're gonna have to clean the tank. The biggest thing, if you see poop or urates, any kind of waste in that tank, food that hasn't been eaten, spot clean it when you see it. Don't let waste sit in that tank. That's how parasites and mites and things happen. Deep clean that tank pretty often. The substrate, depending on the size of the tank, if you have a tiny little baby in a tiny little tank, you probably want to change that substrate about once a month. If you have a large 4-foot or 6-foot enclosure, you probably want to change that substrate about once every 6 months. The way that I know when my substrate needs to be changed is when it starts to look compacted. Obviously, if there's any kind of weird smells coming from your enclosure, you need to clean it. In order to deep clean, you're just taking the substrate out, wiping the glass out using some sort of disinfectant like F10 or EcoClean or any sort of cleaning solution. Make sure to thoroughly get that cleaning solution out of there or let it dry or whatever the directions say, and then put fresh soil in and you're good to go. No, you're not good to go. Just kidding. Clean all the things in the tank too. Basically, I just like to take all the decorations out and just soak them in my giant sink with dish detergent and just let them soak and mix them all around. And then I just rinse all the soap off, let it all dry out, or sometimes I let it dry out, sometimes I just stick it back in there. These guys are also a pretty good candidate for bioactive tanks because they do have that humidity on, I mean, up to 60%, and they're not super destructive. Again, they will get into your plant roots, so keep that in mind. The pothos plant that he had before did not seem to mind. Pothos are like crazy indestructible. They're going to slither all around, but they're not necessarily going to destroy those plants unless they're uprooting them. Pretty good candidates for bioactive tanks. So that is also something that you can do. You can make some really beautiful bioactive tanks for king snakes, and then you don't have to clean it as much. All you do is clean glass and urates. That's always an option. I absolutely adore bioactive tanks because of the huge lessening of cleaning of the tank. So there you go. And then just a couple of common issues, which most of them we've already touched on in the video itself, but not eating. Make sure to check temperatures, check the rodent size, change up the correct color of rodent if possible, change where you're putting it, add more cover, things like that. Not shedding correctly, make sure to have a humid hide or to raise the humidity when the animal is shedding and have a big enough water bowl for them to soak if they need to. Them being shy, it happens. You can try to handle them down, or just make sure there's more things in your tank. Make sure that it is full enough for them to feel safe coming out. Musking, I don't know that this is an issue, but it is something to be aware of when you start trying to handle that snake down and you're pulling it out. Make sure to understand that they probably will musk on you and you're gonna have to wash your hands, so it's gonna smell really, really bad. So just keep that in mind as well. You of course always have things like external parasites, but keeping tanks clean and keeping everything good should prevent things like that from happening. So just make sure everything is clean and you are keeping those temperatures right and feeding appropriate foods to your critter. But that is about it. That is all that I have for this video. I'm sure I missed things. Anytime I do long videos like this, I always miss 1,000 things. So always check the description, because anything that I remember, personally, I will write in the description, and make sure to leave comments below for any tips that you may have for a new California Kingsnake keeper in keeping their kingsnake. As I said at the beginning of this video is sponsored by I Heart Geckos. I Heart Geckos is an awesome company that makes conversion kits so that you can turn normal glass tanks into front opening tanks for your critters. These are super easy to install. You just measure that tank, stick the conversion kit into the tank, silicone around it, and let the silicone dry and air out, and you are good to go. I saw a super cool picture of someone that did a complete DIY of a glass tank and removed the top panel as well to allow themselves to put mesh screen in the top so they could put UVB on the top. Super cool. Make sure if you do order one of these really cool kits, you leave Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear About Us box. That way they know that you guys are coming from here. Thank you so much to I Heart Geckos for sponsoring this video. As always, if you haven't already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials, like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday and some Wednesdays. This week's Instagram shout out is here, and this week's subscribe shout out is here. Thank you so much for liking and following, subscribing, and commenting, and sharing, and all that jazz. You are the bee's knees. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Do do do. That's where you're going? Okay. Okay. Is that good? Are you good? Okay. California King. I don't know what you're trying to do. Are you going? My hair's not. Okay. You're right up against my throat. You could just kill me if you wanted to. I have had mine for about a year or two at this point, I think. And are you that old? I've had you for a year or two, jeez. And, oh, can you see him? No, you cannot. Well, actually, no, he's going the wrong way to be seen. As far as that, so, as far as that, it is a colubrid type snape. It is a, and then I rinse them off and get all the dish soap off. I can hear the king snake. He's like down here in his tank and it keeps throwing me off. Okay, that one is done. My battery's about to die.